Welcome to We Need to Talk about tech, where we talk about the past,
present, and future
of technology.
All right. On this episode of the podcast, we talk about Intel's new 12th gen chips, more maxed out than the M1s.
We talk about the Samsung Galaxy S22 leaks.
And we talk about PlayStation and Sony clapping back by buying Bungie. Okay, on to topic number one. We're going to start off with Intel's new Alder Lake mobile chips. Now, their desktop versions have been out for a while, and they're very powerful chips. Everything's had great things to say about them. But now they've kind of come out with their first mobile version of their chip, and it's debuted in the MSI GE76 laptop. It features an Intel Core i9 12900HK, which is sort of their flagship of their 12th generation Alder Lake chips. And I guess one of the big things about it is over the past few years and now over the past generations of chips, Intel has really fallen behind when it comes to power efficiency when you compare it to AMD, and especially when you compare it to Apple and their M1 chips. And they've kind of changed the architecture of their chips this year, and they have it as a sort of like a big little architecture, right? This 12th generation i9 chip has 14 cores, it has 6 performance cores, and 8 efficiency cores, which kind of allows it to be more power efficient than previous Intel chips. Another interesting thing about them debuting it in this MSI laptop is it's paired with a NVIDIA 3080 Ti. So not only does it have the most powerful Intel chip possible, it also has the most powerful NVIDIA graphics card possible. And some of the sort of benchmarks, some of the real world testing that we've seen from people, they haven't beaten pretty much every other laptop out there, and even beaten every other MacBook. You know, when you look at the M1 Pros, the M1 Max chips, it's beaten them in a lot of things too. So I guess my question to you is, have you seen a lot of the reviews? Have you seen a lot of this, quote unquote, real world testing of these laptops? And what are your impressions of them?
Yeah, so I have seen some of the 12th gen launch, mostly on the desktop side as opposed to the laptop side. I have seen some stuff on the laptop side, but I think the interesting thing is with Intel kind of leading with the 12900K. I think that's important because overall, Intel's 12th gen, although it's a pretty nice improvement over 11th gen, most of 11th gen was really good as well. But it just didn't get much talk because, unfortunately, the flagship processor, like you mentioned, of last generation, the 11900K, was really bad. It was actually in a lot of cases worse than something like the i5 12600K, or sorry, 11600K. So it's a more expensive processor that performed worse than its less performant processors and cheaper processors, which is just weird. That's not something that should happen. So that chip was a really big disappointment. But along the rest of the line, the chips were actually quite impressive, especially the i5s with the 11400K and the 11600. Sorry, the 11400 and the 11600K. So yeah, it's nice to see that the 12900K is also a big performer. Like you mentioned, it has the new architecture with performance and efficiency cores. And there's two kind of interesting things. I don't know if the comparisons with M1 really make a ton of sense right now, simply because M1 is always going to be more, or not always, but M1 is significantly more efficient than x86. It's ARM, ARM can be a lot more efficient than x86 in its base. So even if we get like a really efficient x86 processor, it's still going to be significantly different in terms of efficiency and battery life and stuff like that. And I've always said, to me, as much as I think the M1, M1 Pro, and M1 Max are a little bit overhyped, the one thing that I can't argue with is their efficiency. That is by far their best feature. But with the 12th gen, I think one of the cool things to really really take in is that there's a very big range in the chips. So, for example, we have the new i5-12400, which doesn't have efficiency and performance cores. Instead, it just has like a regular, chip layout like the 11400 did. And that's a good thing because it's a really strong performing processor. And, comparing it to Intel's other big competitor, which is AMD, the price point is right. There's really nothing in the under $300 price range that's, current from AMD that really compares with the uh, Intel's i5 processors, which is why, I think there's probably a lot of less conversation around the 11 series because at the end of the day, there wasn't really anything that you could get besides it because with their best processors like the 11400 and 11600K, there was no other competition because everything else was so much more expensive.
Mhm.
Since then, AMD has released the 3600G, which is a little bit, more affordable, but still, Intel's really killing it there. So, yeah, it's really strange because with the 12th gen, we have really good processors that are really good in terms of price to performance and budget. So if you need a budget processor, you have the new i3s and i5s that are great. And then finally, unlike the 11 series, the flagship chip, the 12900, is also really, really good. So yeah, they kind of just did a really good job across the line, which despite the fact that the 11th gen was really good, it wasn't a good across the line, which they kind of fixed this year, which is just great to see. And then like you mentioned, in laptops being able to pair a chip like that with the most powerful mobile GPU, it's, a really impressive laptop that, is just really, really cool to see. The one interesting thing though is going to be how these processors form outside of Windows 11 because with the performance and efficiency cores, that is kind of a Windows 11 specific thing. Windows 10 doesn't really handle that well. Um, and I guess that's the benefit, once again, going to Apple of having a fully integrated system of, having the software and hardware be created by the same company. With Intel and Microsoft, Windows 11 is really well prepared for this performance and efficiency core type design, but Windows 10 is not. So, for a lot of those more performant processors, it might not make sense to pair that with a Windows 10 PC. But, who knows? Maybe there's an update coming down the line that kind of makes it a little bit better. But right now, that's not really the
Mhm.
case.
Yeah. I mean, and you brought up a good point. It's comparing this to Apple isn't necessarily fair because, especially when you look at, okay, if we're talking about the MSI GE76, which is the only chip that this, the 12900 HK is in right now, it is not the same kind of laptop as a MacBook Pro.
Hmm.
I mean, it's definitely a dedicated gaming laptop. It has an RGB keyboard. It has a nice RGB strip across the bottom. It has a 1080p, I think 360 hertz screen. This is meant for gaming all the way.
Yeah.
And, you brought up a good point. One of the big things about MacBooks one of the big things about M1s is their power efficiency. This is not a power efficient laptop at all. It's kind of by design, it's something that's meant to be okay. You're stationary at a desk,
Mhm.
you have a power source, it's probably going to be plugged in, you're probably going to be gaming, and you want to get the most power out of this thing possible. Now, it's not as portable as a MacBook, it doesn't look as nice as a MacBook, depending on who you are, right? But it's bigger, it's heavier, but because it's bigger, it has better cooling capabilities, better thermal regulation. And partly because it has such a powerful chip, partly because it has such a powerful GPU. But I mean, that's the nature of the game when it comes to gaming laptops. Whereas when it comes to MacBooks, you can't game on a MacBook. I mean, there's probably a few games you could play, but if you're a serious gamer, you need to play on a Windows device. So, a lot of times things get compared to Apple products or MacBooks or what have you because they're consensus they're seen as a consensus good laptop or
Hmm.
good phone or good tablet. So they're not necessarily after the same type of people, but when Apple comes out with a new laptop every year, it's we beat this competitor by X amount, and we beat this other competitor by 100 times. So it's nice to see another competitor be able to outdo Apple and all of their outrageous graphs and outrageous claims. But you also brought up another good point. They have a wide range of chips, from the different versions of their i9s to the different versions of their i7s, their i5s. So I think what's really going to be interesting is when you take like one of their i5 processors and you put it in a thin and light mobile laptop that's not meant for gaming, that's meant for, let's say, power efficiency, that's meant for a student who's going to class and has to do work in the library and then take notes in a lecture and then, on the commute back home from school, maybe do some work too. So they start off with this flagship chip, the best of the best. But I'm interested to see how Alder Lake does, I guess, in a number of different SKUs and different model laptops with different, well, I guess, different price points and also different use cases.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that going forward, the sweet spot is probably going to be the 12600K. An overclockable CPU. I would imagine there's probably going to be a nice mobile version of that with something like an NVIDIA GTX or RTX 3070. And we've seen similar machines with the 11600 and 3070s that are fantastic. And, that was a lot of the conversation we had around the M1 when we were talking about the Pro and the Max, and I mentioned, what, it's not as exciting as M1 was, and a lot of it was because of hype. Like M1 was very, very hyped, and unfortunately, the reality of M1 doesn't live up to a lot of the hype that was brought about at the time. Because remember, when M1 first came out, it was very exciting, and we were seeing all those graphs. It seemed like M1 was going to be something like that was going to break the laws of physics. That it was much better than anything could ever be ever. Which it turned out not to be true, right? Like there's a limit. They talked about how graphics performance was going to be better than an RTX 3080. That's absolutely not the case with the Pro and the Max chips. But the one thing that they did do very well is efficiency and really good performance in apps that are optimized for M1. Now, with things like the Adobe Suite and stuff like that aren't fully optimized yet, I think there was already Windows laptops and Intel powered laptops, not to mention AMD, who's been doing really well with Ryzen for a very long time now, especially on the mobile end, because they make some super efficient mobile chips that perform really well as well. A lot of that was being ignored in that conversation, and I'm just glad to see that conversation is starting to flip around a bit to see, no, there actually is really great stuff from Intel and AMD, especially when they're paired with powerful GPUs that can do a lot in a professional workflow, especially if you're someone who, you need a machine and your apps aren't optimized for M1 yet, and you need something right now. You're not stuck with nothing. There's a lot of really great stuff out there, and Intel's finally got their act together with their flagship chips, so that like I mentioned, the 11900 was such a bad chip that its cheaper chips were outperforming it, which just doesn't make any sense. That would be like if an M1 Max was being outperformed by a base M1. It just wouldn't make any sense, right? So, yeah, to finally see that this is actually working the way it's meant to is great to see.
Yeah, definitely great to see. On to our second topic of the day. We're talking about everything S22. Now, we're recording this on February the 2nd. The S22 Unpacked event is scheduled for February the 9th. So this is, a week ahead of when the actual event is. But pretty much every possible thing has leaked for this event. Unofficial high quality renders have been out for quite some time now. Specs have been out for quite some time now. We've recently even got pricing for a lot of their devices too. So yeah, we're gonna kind of summarize all of the leaks, let you know what we think about them, and it should be interesting. So, of course, when it comes to the processor, right? since Qualcomm announced the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, we kind of figured, okay, that is going to be in the next Samsung S22 phones, especially in North America. In Europe, we're going to get the new Exynos 2200 chip. The S22 and S22 Plus are supposed to have a similar, almost identical design to the S21 and S21 Plus last year. They have 120 hertz OLED displays, ultrasonic in-display fingerprint sensors. Their displays are slightly smaller at 6.1 inches and 6.6 inches. They have a higher peak brightness. One interesting thing is the devices are slightly shorter and slightly thinner, and a slightly smaller battery, going at 3,700 milliamp hours for the S22 and 4,500 milliamp hours for the S22 Plus. Another interesting thing, they both apparently will have a 50 megapixel main camera, which is going to allow for better nighttime photography and, better low light photography. Now, from the leaks, from the things we've seen from the S22 and the S22 Plus, how do you feel about these two phones? With the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, with the screen sizes sticking relatively the same and a slightly smaller battery.
Well, first of all, the design I actually really like. I like the downplayed camera bump. I'm not a big phone photographer, so the idea that there isn't 50 cameras on the back is really cool. There's 3 on the S22 and S22 Plus, and it's a much flatter bump. It's not as big as it was on the S21, which is nice as well, at least for me. But the size, I'm so glad that the phone's got a bit smaller because both the S22 and the S22 Plus, I think, are perfect sizes. The S22 is a little bit smaller than my current phone, which is the Xiaomi Mi 9T, and the S22 Plus is a little bit bigger with an even larger screen. But the size difference between my current phone and that phone are so small that it really makes me think, oh, you know what, that might be my next phone. I've had this phone for just about 3 years now, and I don't really need anything new. But the idea that there is actually really good small phones coming out is nice to see. The 120 hertz, great. Under display fingerprint sensor, something I wish they would just put the fingerprint sensor on the side, kind of like what Sony does. Under display, I think you've had experience with this, like you mentioned. It can be a little bit slow, and honestly, I've never used my under display fingerprint sensor on my current phone, mainly because of that, but also because it's just not all that convenient. It's not something you can easily see where it is when you're not using it. So it's kind of just not a great design. I don't know why a lot of companies are still staying with it, even though it sounds cool. In practice, it's not really all that practical. But yeah, overall, I think the design of the phones is really cool. The interesting thing is, I did see on YouTube just an advertisement from the Samsung channel for their Exynos chip, their 2200 chip, which is strange because we talked about, hey, it's probably delayed. And they're still thinking about talking about it in their event, even though they might not ship any devices with it right away. Maybe it's just best not to talk about it, but they've already started advertising their next Exynos chip, which is going to have RDNA 2 graphics from AMD, similar to the Steam Deck and the same kind of architecture that was used in the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. So that's really exciting. And I'm kind of curious to see if maybe they decide to delay the phones altogether and maybe try to get those chips in the phones, or if we might see something else like maybe a Galaxy Tab from them in their next event that could have these chips, could be the first device that ships with these chips. But yeah, it's just, I really like the choices that they made with these phones, and I'm kind of excited to see the Galaxy Unpacked event. Unfortunately, it's just a little bit unfortunate. We talked about it on the podcast in the past that they leaked, because it could have been really cool to see these things. Although it's not that big of a surprise. It's pretty similar to last year's devices, but still, I imagine a lot of people are probably upset that all this stuff leaked, because pretty much everything is out there. Even the dimensions of the phone. So yeah, but it's cool to see. I'm really excited about what these phones are.
I think the biggest letdown that we won't be surprised with is the S22 Ultra, because as we mentioned, the S22 and S22 Plus, they look pretty much the same
Mhm.
as last year's phone. But the S22 is such a radical redesign from what they did last year that that could have been something really cool where it's like, okay, yeah, it's the same phone essentially, a new chip, a better screen, a little bit smaller. And then the S22 Ultra would come out of nowhere and be like, oh my gosh, this is completely different. Like,
Yeah.
did not see this coming, but we've seen it coming. And another interesting thing is they have called this event the most noteworthy S series ever.
Mm.
Emphasis on the note there. We've talked in the past, we talked last year about there not being a note and is the note going to be done with. It really seems like they're hinting at the S22 Ultra is going to replace the note line, or really the note line has just been rebranded to the S22 Ultra. Really.
Yeah.
It's a completely different design when you compare it to the regular S22 and S22 Plus. You can't really call it the same phone. It is a note more than anything. When you turn in terms of, it's more of a boxy design, it's more of a squared off screen, and it has a built-in slot or a built-in silo for the S Pen. This is a note that is just being called an S22 Ultra. I guess maybe so people don't get confused with when it comes out, or, for whatever reason, they're calling it an S22 Ultra. It has the same size screen as last year's model, the 6.8-inch screen. It has the same size battery, 5,000 milliamp hours, the same weight thickness. It's essentially the same phone, just redesigned to look like a note. But an interesting thing, you brought up is the supply chain issues, along with specs and, dimensions and renders. There have also been some leaks as to when things will be available for pre-order. It's supposed to be immediately after the event. You can pre-order everything February 9th. The S22 Ultra is supposed to be able to ship, or it's going to be delivered February 25th. The S22 and S22 Plus won't be available until March 11th. So already it seems like there is going to be some sort of, delay because of global supply chain issues. Interesting that we know that, or that we've heard that before the event even happens. And another thing that has leaked is the pricing. So these are rumors. Once again, this isn't confirmed, but if it is true, then you guys heard it here first. The Galaxy S22. Actually, no, before I do that, I'd like to hear your guesses on what the prices will be, because I don't think that you've seen the leaked prices yet.
I have not. And this is one really interesting thing, because looking at the phones, I was like, oh yeah, this could be something I could upgrade to, or I could see myself upgrading to if the price is right. So did the price leak for all three, or just the S22 and S22 Plus? Okay. All right. So I'll give what I hope the prices are for the S22 and S22 Plus, and then what I think the price will be for the S22 Ultra. For the S22, I hope the price is in US dollars somewhere in the $699 to $799 price range. Although I think that's still too high for me, I think that's a good price range for, a flagship phone. And then I hope that the, S22 Plus is $100 more than that. So $699, $799 is what I'm hoping.
Sorry, for the S22 Plus,
so
that'd be $799 to $899.
Well, what I would hope is that the S22 is $699 and the S22 Plus is $799. So $700 and $800. Like I said, still too high for me, but phones have gotten so expensive these days. I hope it's not more than that. And then for the Ultra / Note, I am just gonna guess that it's going to be a ridiculously priced phone and going to be like $1,400. I really hope it's cheaper than that, but I'm just gonna go crazy because I do remember, I believe it was the S20 or the Note 20. The Note 20 Ultra was such a ridiculously expensive phone that it was kind of insulting that they would make a phone that expensive, and then that's why I wasn't surprised that there was no Note 21, because I'm like, well, why would
Yeah,
anyone want if it's going to be that price? But yeah, okay, so those are my guesses: $699, $799, and $13.99.
those are good guesses.
You're exactly right.
I'm not gonna say anything just yet.
If they are, I didn't know beforehand.
Yeah, guys, this isn't a conspiracy. Okay, so from last year, S21 was $799. S21 Plus was $999. S21 Ultra was $1199 from last year. After seeing those, do you want to change your estimates at all?
No, I'm gonna hope that you know, they found some cost cutting and were able to get the phones a little bit cheaper.
So the prices of their S22 phones are exactly the same as their S21 phones.
Oh, okay.
So the S22 is $799 at the top of your range. S22 Plus is $999, so a bit above your range, about $100 more, but it's the same as it was last year.
Mhm.
The S22 Ultra, $1199, so $200 less than what you said, and still the same price as last year. So after seeing that, does that kind of change what you think about the phones? I mean, they are slightly smaller, slightly better specs in some aspect, and they haven't really, well, no, they haven't changed the prices, right? And I think last year with the S21 phones, if I remember correctly, they actually were $100 cheaper than the S20 phones were.
Yeah.
So at least not going up in price.
Yeah. I mean, the S20 line was, there's a reason why the S20 fan edition happened so quickly, and it's because that line was a failure. No one wanted those phones because they weren't very good, especially on the camera side, and they were ridiculously overpriced. And the S21 was kind of like the fixer for that. A lot of people really liked the S21 series, especially when compared to the S20. That being said, I am a little disappointed. I was hoping that we would kind of see a continuation of that price decrease. And even though the Ultra is still the same as last year's, I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. I know I said it was going to be, I thought it might be a little bit more expensive just because the Note Ultra was ridiculous, but from the S20 line. But you know, I would really hope for these phones to get a little bit cheaper, especially you know, with the S21, or sorry, the S22 and S22 Plus. They can be a little bit simpler phones. Like, they don't have 20 cameras on the back, like I mentioned. The Ultra does. The Ultra has a ton of cameras and a ton of sensors and stuff like that. So I feel like they could potentially make those phones a little bit cheaper going forward. But I am definitely not the regular consumer, especially in North America. In North America, most people get their phones through carriers, and they're subsidized, so they don't really ever see that full retail price. It's really only the people who buy their phones unlocked who actually see those prices. So, and that's a huge minority. I'm one of those people who likes to get their phones unlocked instead of paying on a contract. But yeah, that's not most people. So I can definitely see why it doesn't really make much sense to make the phones cheaper, especially in North America, when most people are going to be getting them on a contract anyways.
And if you look at the S22 Ultra, I mean, it kind of is cheaper because if you wanted an S21 Ultra with an S Pen, then you had to pay for the S Pen and you had to pay for a case for it.
True.
Now you're getting an integrated S Pen, so it sort of is a little bit cheaper in a way.
Yeah.
Some other stuff that is supposed to be announced. We're supposed to be getting a new lineup of Galaxy Tab S8 tablets. There's supposed to be just the regular Tab S8, a Tab S8 Plus, and a new Tab S8 Ultra edition. And those screens are supposed to go from 11 inches to 12.7 inches to 14.6 inches. And they're all supposed to feature the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 processor. Now, maybe, as you said, in Europe, we may get those same tablets with an Exynos 2200. But as someone who uses a Galaxy tablet, is this something that, you're intrigued in, or you're interested to see what kind of features they add? what kind of specs we may get from these, because they're all supposed to feature a 120 hertz display. Something that, okay, if we're talking about Apple, because as I said, everything gets compared to Apple products, that was only on the Pro model. So now all three versions of their tablets are supposed to get a high refresh rate. The Plus and the Ultra are supposed to have OLED panels. Is this something that is intriguing to you, or how do you feel about it?
I think that idea kind of reminds me a little bit. Once again, I'm going to bring up the S20 line of the S20 line. When the S20 line came out, there was the S20, the S20 Plus, the S20 Ultra, the Note 20, and then the Note 20 Ultra. There's way too many devices. Like, it didn't really make much sense. And I think that could be the same thing for these tablets. I don't know why there needs to be so many versions of these tablets, because they all sound like they're going to be pretty premium with those specs, like Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 and, high refresh rate screens. Those sound like they're probably going to be expensive devices. Not to mention on, the more expensive devices, I imagine there's going to be a lot of features or missing features that Apple kind of coined that a lot of companies are starting to copy, like no headphone jack, which on a tablet to me makes absolutely no sense. But that's something that I can see them doing. So if these are like really expensive, or not expensive, but more premium devices, missing things like headphone jacks and stuff like that, that doesn't really do much for me. I think the reason why the Galaxy Tab S6 Lite is such a great tablet, in my opinion, and why I love it so much, is one, it's super affordable. Two, it only has the features that you need. So the screen isn't fantastic. It's not an OLED screen. It's a LCD screen. It's not the greatest screen in the world, but it's good. It's a good screen. The battery life, it's good battery life. It has a headphone jack. It has an S Pen in the box that you don't have to pay extra for. Those are the things that, make sense to me when it comes to a tablet. Now, that being said, I definitely think there's a place for premium tablets, especially Samsung makes some fantastic premium tablets. But the idea that there would be three, to me seems like it's just too many tablets to be making. And then it also makes me think that they're probably not going to make a Tab S8 Lite, which honestly, I don't even know if they really need to. I think for a lot of people, the A series is probably good enough. They don't support the S Pen, but they could do an A8 tablet, and it could meet most people's needs. But yeah, I would like to see another light tablet from Samsung eventually. It doesn't have to be this year, but three premium tablets to me seems like way too much. But I'm curious, how about you? I mean, this is them trying to compete with, I would imagine, the iPad Air, iPad Pro 11, and then iPad Pro 13. Do you think Samsung needs to compete with Apple in that same way, or should they just kind of, stick to their guns, make their premium tablet, and then make a budget tablet for everyone else?
I kind of think that they do need to compete with Apple in that way,
Mm,
just because when it comes to their phones, right, they definitely make flagship phones that directly compete with Apple's iPhones, but they also offer things that Apple doesn't. For Android, Android has a lot of features that Apple products and iPhones just won't have, not to mention their whole stylus ecosystem with their phones. I mean, they brought it a bit to their non-note phones last year. Now it seems like we're going to get an S22 with a built-in stylus, and there's no talks, there's no rumors, there's no sort of inkling that Apple is even considering bringing that to iPhones, which I think would be a huge game changer for Apple if they, hey, that our new iPhone 14 Pro Max is compatible with our Apple Pencil 3. I think people would go bonkers for that.
yeah.
But they're probably not going to do that, because then you won't need to buy an iPad, and too much fragmentation, or not enough fragmentation
Mm,
of their ecosystem. But when it comes to the tablets, I like the idea of the three versions, because now, especially if you take out the Note, it matches up perfectly with the three versions of their phones,
yeah,
right?
that's
And
true.
now we have, from what we've seen of how they look, it doesn't seem like they mirror the look of their phones. But when you talk about, okay, marketing, it's, you have just the basic entry level S22, You want a little bit bigger. We have the S22 Plus. You want the very best we have. That's what Ultra is. And I think that's also another reason why they're doing away with the Note lineup, because when you have the S20 Ultra, that's supposed to be the best thing. But there's a Note and there's a Note Ultra, so it's really not the best thing.
Yeah.
But now when you hear Ultra from Samsung, that means the best.
Yeah.
So the best phone, S22 Ultra. The best tablet, the S8 Ultra. Just like for the past 2 years, past 2 years at least, they've been doing a fan edition. I could see them replacing the Tab S8 Lite with, let's say, a Tab S8 fan edition that comes out later on in the year at the same time as the S22 fan edition. And I could see that being a more consistent message marketing wise for them, right? So they have the three, the S8, S8 Plus, S8 Ultra, S8 fan edition. I could see that carrying across all of their different products, or at least, their consumer facing products. I could see they might not do this with their watches, but I could see them maybe trying to do this with their watches. So there's a consistent message between, the regular, the Plus, and the Ultra. You know what you're getting, you know what you're paying for. And when you look at iPhones, right, it's kind of, there's a mini, or not even just iPhones, I guess. And, when you look at Apple products, there's usually a mini, there's usually a base model, and then there's a Pro. And when it comes to Apple, the mini is going to be a little bit smaller, probably a bit less expensive. The Pro is going to be bigger than everything else, more expensive, the best features, and then there's just the baseline. So with their marketing, with Apple's marketing, they have a pretty consistent message, pretty consistent, pronouns and adjectives that they add on to things. So you know what you're getting performance-wise, and you know what you're getting price-wise. With this new naming scheme, if they do follow it, I think it kind of clears up the marketing and messaging for Samsung also. So I think, to me, it makes a lot of sense. We'll see, once again, if they actually go with this marketing, because these are all rumors as of right now, a week away from the event. But I'm definitely excited to see them compete with Apple, maybe a little bit more directly in the tablet space. And also, they offer a lot of things like DeX, like better multitasking that Apple just doesn't do. So I'm also looking forward to maybe taking some market share away from Apple and then forcing them to improve on what they do on their tablets.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that. I think you're 100% right with the branding of it falling in line with the phones. They did do what you mentioned, like with the Tab S7. They later on released a fan edition. The interesting thing with that, though, and I don't know, maybe it's just might be a situation where Samsung might try to get out of the budget tablet space. Maybe it's just not something that's really all good for their branding. But when the Tab S6 came out, it was very affordable. Sometimes you could even get it when it was new for as low as $299 USD. The S7 Lite, Tab S7 Lite, was much more expensive, and kind of closer to the $500-$600 range. So the idea that they might be going away from that budget tablet kind of idea, I get it. I think it makes sense. The only thing, my apprehension with them competing with Apple on that way, means that we'll probably see less budget tablets that have S Pen support. Because I think they're always going to do their A series and their cheap tablets, but those don't have S Pen support. So the fact that they made this kind of really great device that could be as low as $299, has a 10-inch screen, really good design, decent screen, and has S Pen support right in the box, to me was like a deal of value that Apple couldn't compete with, which is why I went for that over the base iPad. But if they get away from that, I understand that there's more money in the higher margin, more expensive tablets. It's just a shame because that's something that Apple doesn't do currently. That Samsung did, and it seems like they might be going away from that. But I do think what you're saying makes sense, of the tablets line coinciding with the phone line, which yeah, it's a really good idea.
To be clear, I still think they should do budget tablets and offer S Pens with that. Yeah, I definitely think they should compete with Apple, but I also think they should continue to do things that Apple isn't doing.
Yeah.
Maybe to put some pressure on them to do better, to make more budget-friendly devices with more features, but also it's something that is successful. I mean, we don't have their books. We don't know what their numbers are. It's something that seems successful, I guess, from the outside. And I think it's definitely something that the market needs. And, as we've said multiple times on the podcast, just because Apple does something doesn't mean everyone needs to necessarily go and follow them. So
Yeah.
for the record, I'm a fan of budget tablets with S Pens.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, our final topic for the day. Sony has clapped back at Microsoft and bought Bungie, the studio originally responsible for Halo and responsible for Destiny, and they've purchased them for $3.6 billion. In our last podcast, in our last episode, we were kind of saying, hey, are we going to see some sort of retaliation? Are we going to see some sort of escalation from Sony possibly in the future? Well, we didn't have to wait long. They've done it. The interesting thing, or not necessarily the interesting thing, it makes a lot of sense, but Bungie will continue to independently publish and creatively develop their games. And they will continue to make games and, future things that they develop multi-platform. So with our talk last episode, we're kind of worried, hey, could we see a future where Call of Duty no longer comes out on PlayStation? It's only an Xbox exclusive. I think with Sony purchasing Bungie, and as soon as they purchase it, everyone's saying, hey, we're not doing this to make Bungie games console exclusive to PlayStation. We're not doing it to take them away from Xbox. We want everyone to play our games on any platform, whether it's PlayStation, Xbox, whether it's Google Stadia, whether it's, Microsoft, Windows. I think that's a good thing for the gaming industry as a whole, because I think in large part it's because they understand that, hey, there's a lot of money to be made. Why are we going to give away like half of our profits just to say that you can only play this on PlayStation or you can only play this on Microsoft? I know it's definitely driven by money, but I think for the gaming community, it's good that both sides have their, let's say, their IP that they could make console exclusives, but they're saying, no, we want these communities that have been developed on Xbox, developed on PlayStation, developed on Windows. We want you to continue playing these games where you've been playing these games all along. But I'm interested to hear, what are your thoughts on this recent purchase from PlayStation, from Sony? What do you think it means for the future of the gaming landscape?
Well, first of all, I think that statement is a lie. I think 100%. First of all, I think this purchase is kind of the biggest meme purchase I've ever seen, especially for video games. The interesting thing is, Bungie not too long ago was a part of Activision. They only recently split up with Activision, and they had a pretty big falling out with Activision in terms of how Activision was kind of forcing microtransactions onto Destiny. I don't know if you guys remember. I think it was called like Glitter or something like that. There was like a store.
Wasn't it Glimmer?
Glimmer, there you go. But it wasn't Glimmer. It was actually another currency that they introduced afterwards, where you could go to like a postmaster and you can buy like cosmetics and stuff like that with real world money that you transferred into an in-game currency, and then you could get like, and I'm pretty sure that still exists to this day, but that was kind of an initiative brought on by Activision after they bought Bungie. And one of the interesting things is when Bungie and Activision finally split, Bungie was very clear about, hey, we're taking back control of Destiny. We're going to do things the way we want to do them. No more Activision kind of getting in into our pockets, so to speak, or into your pockets as players. But the interesting thing is they were very happy about splitting up to then go back to a big company. I'm sure that's really great for them in terms of job security, but also kind of weird considering that they just fought really hard to get their independence. But also, like you mentioned, Bungie is the studio that made Halo. And it feels like a huge meme because, one, Bungie is a name that has been tied with Xbox for so long. And two, they were a company that used to work with Activision. So it seems like the exact opposite what the purchase that Microsoft made with Activision. That being said, I think the whole reason for this is when and if Call of Duty becomes or starts to lose support on PlayStation devices, uh, this is Sony's way of saying, well, we can make a top tier FPS. Like, you mentioned, we talked about uh, the Activision purchase in the last podcast, but we also brought up Bungie. We talked about how, they made Destiny and they had really good relationships with Sony and about getting exclusives with things like Hawk Moon, which was a really big gun in Destiny, and then even exclusive maps that took years to show up on Xbox. Um, and that was a relationship that they had, but also a relationship that Sony had with Call of Duty. Call of Duty got exclusives on PlayStation early as well. So if that kind of switches over under Microsoft's ownership to have those kinds of things switch over to Xbox consoles or even full exclusivity, this is the perfect way of Sony being able to say, well, we have the best, maybe, possibly, the best FPS maker in the world that can make us an exclusive game. It maybe Destiny 3 is a PlayStation exclusive, or maybe they make a brand new IP that goes toe to toe with Call of Duty and it's a PlayStation exclusive from Bungie. I think this is their way of answering that. And most importantly, I think why this is important for Sony is because I don't think Xbox wants any Activision game to be Xbox exclusive. What they want is they want Game Pass to be available on PlayStation. And PlayStation knows I think they know at the back of their head that it's kind of like a Trojan horse of Xbox wants Game Pass on our system. We won the console market, but really does that matter? At the end of the day, where we make our money is on game sales. And could Xbox getting a Trojan horsing a system like Game Pass onto our console, similar to what EA did with EA Play, could that hurt our business long term? And how do we fight the urge of actually wanting to adopt something like Game Pass on our console if they say we can't get Call of Duty without it, or you can't get Overwatch 2 without it? And their way to do that is to buy studios to make competitors to those games. And Bungie is probably the perfect, not even probably, it is the perfect answer to that. Sony already makes great, single player games with Uncharted and Last of Us and all those stuff that they do so well. They don't have a first person shooter game maker. Like they Guerrilla Games has moved on from making first person shooters, and they've been a lot better since. So why not pick up the best first person shooter game creator so that we don't have to worry about what Xbox does going forward? So yeah, I don't think that statement is necessarily true. I think the moment that they can, they will start making Bungie games exclusive. But I don't know. How do you feel about it?
I am very optimistic for the future.
Mm-hmm.
I think everyone's going to play along nicely. We're going to continue to get Call of Duty on PlayStation. We're going to continue to get Destiny on Xbox. But that is interesting that you brought up possibly getting Game Pass on PlayStation. I never really thought of that as a real possibility, but it makes a lot of sense. PlayStation has definitely won the console war, but what does it matter if then you get Xbox Game Pass on PlayStation? Like you said, most of the money that's being made is on game sales after the fact. So let's say you get Xbox on PlayStation, and then PlayStation players get used to playing Xbox games with Game Pass and say, oh, I'm not at home. I can play this on my phone, or I can play this on my Galaxy Tab S8 Ultra. And then the next time there's a console refresh, people are thinking to themselves, hey, I don't really play that much on my PlayStation 5. I can play this anywhere. I'm already paying for it. Why would I bother buy a PlayStation 6 if all the games that I play already are on Xbox Game Pass? They come out day and date. I don't have to worry about downloading this game or going out and buying this game or paying $70, $80, $90 per game. It's just a simple $15 fee. That definitely seems like a Trojan horse to me, but that is if one day we get Game Pass on PlayStation. right? If we one day get Game Pass on PlayStation, that's definitely a that's definitely a winning strategy for Xbox. I would like to think that both companies, both Microsoft and Sony, understand that, hey, to make the most money possible for us, we're going to keep these games multi-platform so that you keep your games multi-platform and we can all make money together. I don't think they necessarily need to say, hey, we're going to take over this market so you can't make any money, even though we're going to make less money than we would if we all just kept everything multi-platform. I hope that that's kind of how these companies are thinking, that we're going to make everything multi-platform so everyone can play and everyone can give us their money. But I mean, who knows? Only time will tell.
Well, I definitely think Xbox is, or not even Xbox, Microsoft's future is third party. I think they are looking to becoming a third party, which is why I don't think it's a coincidence that Phil Spencer is now the head of Microsoft Gaming and not the head of Xbox. I think there's definitely some change coming. You might even see a change to Xbox Game Pass being called Microsoft Game Pass in the not too distant future. But yeah, they definitely want Game Pass on everything. And the interesting thing is the ball is in Sony's court, really, because something like Call of Duty not being on a PlayStation console is like 75% of game sales. A Bungie game not being on an Xbox console, much less, 25%, a quarter of consoles. So there's much less to lose for Sony making a Bungie game exclusive. And I think Sony knows that. I think Bungie knows that. I think Microsoft knows that. And it goes back to the fact that Microsoft really did lose the console war. It's kind of the reason why, despite the fact that so many Switches sold, a lot of third parties aren't making games for the Switch because the Wii U sold 13 million units. And a lot of companies got burned from trying to support that console. And I feel like the same thing is going to happen with Xbox. The Xbox One sold a lot less units than the PlayStation. And a lot of companies that, especially who made deals with Microsoft, got burned on that. And I think Microsoft knows it. And I think the only way of them going forward, or not the only way, but probably the most successful way they see themselves going forward is with Game Pass and going third party and having Game Pass available on everything. So it doesn't matter if you have a PlayStation, you can play Halo as long as you subscribe to Game Pass. It doesn't matter if you have a PC, you can play Call of Duty as long as you subscribe to Game Pass. It doesn't matter if you have your phone. You can play whatever you want as long as you subscribe to Game Pass. And I think that's definitely the future of Xbox and Microsoft. But I also think Sony is very much like, we don't want any part of that. We don't want to be a part of you bringing about this new subscription service and leaving us, in an old style or, a previous generation style market where we're about selling consoles and selling games at $90 or $60 to $90 a piece. We don't want to help you. So I think this is their way of fighting back the need to help Microsoft by saying, we'll just make competing games and try to hold out as long as they can until they get their subscription service built. It's kind of like the streaming wars with Netflix and Disney Plus and HBO Max and all that. But this is the start of it with games. And, Sony's like, you know what, we're going to do it ourselves. We don't want to help you. So I think that's exactly what's happening. It's going to be very similar to when Disney was giving Netflix, licensing all their stuff to Netflix. And then all of a sudden they pulled it all away when they decided, why would we do this when we could just make our own thing? And I think that's exactly what Sony feels like right now.
I mean, if I wanted to play devil's advocate, I don't know. I don't see them pulling, let's say Call of Duty, for instance. I don't see them pulling that from PlayStations because, like you said, there are a lot more PlayStations out there than Xboxes, like we both said. So let's say if they wanted to make it a Microsoft Game Pass exclusive, essentially they could be killing Call of Duty themselves. Part of why it's so popular is because it's been on consoles and predominantly because it's been on PlayStations. If you then say, hey, you can't play this first person shooter franchise on PlayStation when there are like 3 times more PlayStations than there are Xboxes, people will find another game to play.
Yeah.
And maybe this is an old fashioned way of thinking. I'm a console gamer for the most part. I don't want to play games on my computer. I don't want to play games on my phone. I want to sit in front of a TV, play games on my TV. If you say you can't play Call of Duty, all right, I'll play Destiny, or maybe there'll be some other game that comes out by then, right? I don't see them doing that with Call of Duty. One way they could get around this is, as we've brought up in the past, game streaming is becoming built into TVs, or, for 2022, it's going to be built into TVs. Maybe moving forward, we could see a Microsoft Game Pass enabled Samsung TV, right? Where you buy the TV and it comes with an Xbox controller. It comes with Microsoft Game Pass 1-year subscription for free for the first year. Maybe then, but also when you look at gaming studios, right? If you're a gaming studio, you make a lot more money for your studio and for your employees if you sell those games at $90 a pop, as opposed to if you're part of this bigger corporation that, is given unlimited access to all of their games for $15 a month, right? You don't make as much for your studio. You don't make as much for your employees. And maybe you don't make as much for your bonuses either. So as a studio, let's say if I had to decide, okay, am I going to license my stuff to Microsoft where I get an infinitesimal, this ridiculously small portion of this $15 a month, or am I going to license my stuff to Sony where I could get, let's say 30% out of their $90 per game? I'm going to go with Sony. I'm going to produce stuff for Sony. Because like you said, yeah, the Wii sold 13 million units or 13 million devices. People didn't want to produce for that. They didn't want to develop games for that console. So if it's, okay, am I going to develop games for Microsoft, who's going to essentially give my game away for free? Or am I going to develop games for PlayStation, who has enough consoles and will sell my game? I'm going to go to PlayStation.
Yeah.
So I definitely see game streaming becoming a bigger thing in the future. And once again, I could just be old fashioned. I could be a boomer. I don't see console gaming going away. And I don't see people buying games individually going away.
I completely agree with you. And that's why I say the ball is in Sony's court. Like, Sony has the ball. And essentially what they're saying with this purchase, in my opinion, is you want to make Call of Duty exclusive, Microsoft? Go ahead. We'll make duty calls from Bungie. So, we don't have to worry about it. Because at the end of the day, most people are playing their games on PlayStations. And if they can't access that Call of Duty game, we will make a direct competitor that they can play, and they'll completely forget that Call of Duty ever existed. And I think because Sony won the console war, this is their answer to any idea of Call of Duty becoming exclusive, is we'll just make our own.
Yeah. Duty calls and Ola.
Yeah.
Master Chef. Saving the day. I guess any closing statements of the episode?
No, it's just it's kind of interesting to see who is going to be the next studio to get purchased. Who knows? We might see Sony or Microsoft buy CD Projekt, and Witcher games might become an exclusive or something like that. But it's definitely what we were saying last podcast. This definitely seems like two companies going to war with each other. But I do think that the end of result is going to be, we're probably not going to see another Xbox console 10 years from now. And it's just going to be a streaming service, but we're probably going to see a PlayStation 6. I think these are two companies going in two completely different directions. And Sony being like, we don't want you to be on our system, and Microsoft saying, but we want our system to be on everything.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Nintendo makes a big game developer purchase?
No.
They're staying out of it.
I think they completely stay out of it. The fact that the one thing I think Nintendo has done so smartly, and I think a lot of people criticize them for, but I'm a big fan of, is The Switch is very low powered, meaning that you can develop games a lot cheaper and a lot easier. You don't need 30 studios making Call of Duty games the way that you do with like an HD console or a 4K console like the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. And I think that's a good thing. Like, Pokemon Arceus just came out and people are liking it. A lot of people are complaining that it doesn't look great, but hey, guess what? The fact that it doesn't look like, of God of War also means that it was a lot cheaper and a lot easier to develop. And I definitely think that's a good thing for games. I think games have definitely gotten too expensive. I think Nintendo's found a good way of being able to beat at their own drum, and not have to worry about what anyone else is doing. And I think Sony is following suit. They're being like, you know what? We know what we're good at. We're not gonna fight with you, Microsoft. If you want to do something, we're just gonna do our own thing. And I think Microsoft is doing the same thing. So I think this is the first time I can remember where you have three companies who have three completely different ideas of what console gaming or at-home gaming looks like. And I think as much as it might be a downside right now in terms of all these people buying studios, it could end up being a good thing actually, no, I take that back. It's a bad thing. it's going to be a bad thing, but it's just going to be interesting in the fact that it's going to be very different from what we've seen in the past.
Yeah. All right. Take it easy, everyone in podcast land.
Catch you in the next episode.